For those of you online, thank you so much for taking the time. And we actually have a very special panel today. We have our distinguished guest over the Zoom from UCL, Catherine, with us. And then here on the floor, we have Chihiro as well as Giulia with us today. Now, we will talk about the future of society, and we will have them to introduce themselves to you first. Catherine, should we start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Holloway. I'm the academic director and one of the co-founders of the Global Disability Innovation Hub here in London. And I'm also a professor of interaction design and innovation at University College London. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Giulia?
Hi, my name is Giulia Barbareschi. I'm a JSPS research fellow here at the Keio School of Media Design. I do research around all things that have to do with accessibility and technology for people with disabilities. But in particular, the research that I do at KMD right now, it's focused on art and accessibility and how to make creative expression more accessible and more fun for people with disabilities.
Sounds awesome. Chihiro?
Okay, so hello, I am Chihiro Sato. I am a senior assistant professor here at Keio Media Design. My research topic is on service design, but in particular, we will probably be talking about, I really work close with a wide variety of societies and communities, and I'll probably be talking more about like how I do my projects with like the aged or the disabled today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Ladies, share with us your view on what is it for you in terms of the inclusive society or the future of society, if you will.
So I guess I can kick us off. So to me, an inclusive society, it's a society that values, doesn't just acknowledges the fact that everyone is different, but it values it because we all have different needs, different talents, we all have different interests, and actually that's what brings richness to our society. If we were all the same, we wouldn't have any, we would either be all artists or all mathematicians or all doctors. But luckily, we're all different. So we all can pursue different paths. And to me, this is what an inclusive society really is.
Very interesting view, particularly in the important words of valuing it, not just acknowledging it, but valuing the difference. Catherine, can you share with us your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, I agree completely with Giulia. We often agree. But I'd also say that it's difficult to make society fair and equal. And I think that how we overcome that is both a mix of, I think design has a great place in provoking people to think differently, to be able to imagine a world that's more inclusive and that's more fair and values each person's contribution. But if you take a step outside of the design world, most of the world is dictated by commercial interests and profits and things like that. And at that point, people become commodities. And so if you're not able to earn a living, then somehow you're not valued. And so there's an awful lot of work in trying to get people who are maybe disabled or to get into employment or to have education. But as Giulia, I know, believes that there's more to life than employment and education, right? We love, we live, we laugh, we cry, we have interactions with each other which make our lives worth living. And I think we have to think about that when we're looking at an inclusive society, that everyone should have the right to play, to laugh, to love.
That is very true. I mean, commercialization was one thing. Real human interaction with different emotions and different states, that's really what we are here about. I mean, life, right? Chihiro, your thoughts?
Yeah, I basically agree with what has been discussed already, but I value context, which is a very important term in speaking from service design. Value in context is what we really value. I mean, people, like even if you are like the same individual, you have different contexts within your 24/7. What you are or what you wish is probably not the same the moment you wake up and like what you're doing now, and then like you're probably hungry, you're probably becoming hungry by now, that you're probably thinking about what I should have for dinner. Maybe you won't be listening to what we're talking about now, but thinking about dinner, you know. So context changes for everyone, and adapting very well to what the context does to you is what I really think inclusiveness is about. So it's about diversity, and I mean, you yourself is very diverse as yourself, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we have different roles within the days that we go through. In family at home, you have one role. In school, in different workplace, you actually have different position. You're expected differently. The terms value are then defined differently as we go through. So maybe, Catherine, you can share with us if you see some of the recent trends that's going on in terms of the near future, particularly for society's movement or towards inclusiveness. What are some of the things that you may be spotting, particularly post-COVID? Any changes in society?
Yeah, sure. So I'll stick to disability, even though I think if you go outside disability, you can see that the world is doing two things. It's getting scared again and constricting. And when people get scared, they tend to hold on to things. And we're seeing that in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. And we're seeing it in the United States where women's rights are being rolled backwards, for example. So there are these problems, greater problems within society. But just within disability, which is what I'm an expert in, I think that what we're seeing is at a global level, so particularly in low and middle income countries, so across Asia and Southeast Asia and across Africa, we are beginning to see that for the first time, there's actually a movement to get the systematic structures in place to allow disabled people to have access to the assistive technologies that they need in order to then be participants in whatever life that they choose. And trying to get those systems to work is very complicated. I've lived in Japan, and I know that Japan works very well. The systems work incredibly well in Japan. And then they work very well in Norway and in Sweden. If I'm honest, they don't work particularly well in the UK. But in low and middle income countries, there's no system. There's no way to get wheelchairs or to get the glasses that probably nearly everybody is wearing, or contact lenses. So we're beginning to see that there's been robust data and evidence done by the World Health Organization and UNICEF, which has led to governments being able to see the size of the problem. And that size of the problem is the second trend is obviously, which Japan knew about before anybody else, which is the aging population, right? So we all want to live longer. So that and we want to be able to have good lives. We don't want to spend 20 years in ill health. So I think that's the second trend, I suppose. And then the third trend is digital. More and more of our life is not just even in this verse, this physical verse or digital verse. It's, people are beginning to live in metaverses and in other verses. And what does that mean yet? We're not sure. It's very, very likely that at the beginning it will segment and make wider and less inclusive the world. So people who can afford augmented realities, virtual realities, who happen to be disabled, will end up living really more fully inclusive lives, and people who are in poorer settings will live less inclusive lives because that gap diverges. So I think one of the big challenges is how we make sure when we roll out technology, anybody in the world has access to it.
Definitely. You can see actually all of us are here listening to you keep nodding our heads as you go through the points. I think these are something that we echo very much so, be it in Japan or outside of Japan. There is actually a lot of commonality as it comes into place. Chihiro, your thoughts particularly on maybe aging societies that we were talking about?
Yes, so I've been working very close with a very aged but healthy community It's really hard to say they're aged because, I mean, like, really, I mean, what? Age-wise, they are aged, but mentally, they're very healthy, and they're physically, I mean, they do have issues, but they're healthy enough to live their daily lives, though they do need a little bit of support on a little bit of stuff, daily stuff, like, you know, like you can't have like 10 liters of water bottles, like you can't carry that. I mean, I don't think I can carry it either, but it's probably about what the age community really wants. We kind of assume that they would want something, but in reality, it's something different that they really want. So that's why I was talking about context. Every context is different. Every town is different. And it's really interesting to see all of these different needs that are diverse, but I'm sure there are very common things, like from countries to countries as well.
Your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, few things popped in my mind as Kathy was talking and Chihiro afterwards. One of the things that I was thinking when we were talking about changes that came out as a result of the pandemic, one of the most striking one for me, so right before I actually came to Japan, I did with the Global Disability Innovation Hub and the World Bank, we did a very large piece of work around inclusive education and how education has changed during COVID. One of the things that it really struck is that before the pandemic, there was a lot of resistance towards people attending lectures, courses remotely, and all this sort of things. And for a lot of folks who have disabilities, commuting from their house to their university or a school can sometimes be very hard. And so there were this reasonable accommodations in place of how much like a school could support your remote attendance and how much they could not. And it was the same for work. And there was a lot of resistance to this. Then all of a sudden, you know, the pandemic struck, there was lockdown, and all these things that disabled people for decades have been told that it was not reasonable for them to be able to work from home. Once everyone had to start to work from home, then all of a sudden all of that became reasonable, yeah. Which is equally infuriating, but also it catalyzed change so much quicker. And in certain things, you know, like we have to take this opportunities, and even as you know, Kathy was saying in terms of building systems, sometimes building systems from scratch, it's easier than you know, trying to change them from the inside. And I agree with Chihiro, there is a lot of overlapping. Even if there are differences between contexts, there is overlapping, and we can learn from mistakes or things that can need to be fixed in other countries when we build new systems.
Totally agree. And as Chihiro is saying, actually, in context, within the context, sometimes what we assume, and we also have to battle with the concept of stereotype. I mean, we assume what disabled people may need, or aged people may need, or students from foreign may need, and so on. But that may not be what they need at the end, truly. And so that's definitely important. And also the concept Kathy brought up in terms of digital divide really is something that globally is an issue. I mean, here network is accessible, really easily accessed by many, but that's not the case around the globe. Catherine, would you share some of your thoughts on this whole digital divide with us in the experience that you may have working with?
Yeah, sure. Giulia and I did a study a few years ago now. I think it was 2019, was it, Giulia, with GSMA, which is the big association of mobile phone providers globally. And we found that there is a mobile phone gap within the disabled population globally. So looking at low and middle income countries in particular. So people will be less likely to own their own phone, and then they will be less likely to have access to data, and they will be less likely to use a phone. And it varied in different countries, but you know, there's 20 to 30% couldn't use it. Didn't have access to a mobile phone. But then when people did have access to a mobile phone, we found that disabled users were often the power users of a device. So for example, the deaf community consume a lot of video. You know, like that's how they communicate, is via video. So from a business point of view, it makes sense actually to onboard disabled people. Oftentimes also other research that I did with Giulia, where we looked at when the built environment is not accessible. So for example, if you live in an informal settlement or slum, so there's no sanitation, there's no running water, you know, there's a lot of basic services that are not there. It's very difficult to ask that community to upgrade footways so that they're wheelchair accessible. Right? There are a lot of other problems, huge public health problems that they're dealing with. And so, yes, you can ask them to do that when they're upgrading the whole area, you know, make sure it's accessible. But before that, you can't ask them. And of course, infrastructure projects, you know, are 50 to 150 years in timeline. But mobile phone infrastructure, you can put in much more quickly. So we found that people with physical disabilities were able to overcome the problems of the built environment because they had access to a mobile phone. So at some levels, you've got this divide. And at other levels, once you're given the digital technology, it opens doors that allows you to do many things that you otherwise weren't allowed to do. So it can really sort of catapult people and give them opportunities that they weren't able to have. But then, you know, you talk a lot about an aging population, an older population. I'm beginning to put myself in that category. I feel like my eyesight gets worse every year. My hearing gets a bit worse. So I can't run as fast. But I think that older people in particular, you have to ask, why do people want this technology? Like, you know, and we only ever want technology if it, I think personally, either if it's really useful to us or it offers us new connection. And I think with older people, most older people don't, yes, there's some fun, we seem to always want to design functional things, functional robots, functional hearing devices, functional seeing devices. But actually, I worked in nursing homes as a child, like in homes where old people lived, and I grew up in them because my parents owned them. And nearly all old people that were at the end of their life, what they really wanted was connection. They wanted people to care about them, and for them to be able to give still to society and to care for something else. So I think when we think about this digital divide, I think there's these two paradigms. One is overcoming.
Yes, that's.
Do you feel?
That's okay.
Sorry, my headphones just died.
No problem. Go on, please.
Well, I was just going to say that I think there's these two things. The first thing is this technical, the physical and infrastructure divide. But once it's overcome, most disabled people jump on that bandwagon because they're desperate for opportunity and connection. But at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, when we're designing for older people in particular, when you've lived all your life without these technologies, I think what you're looking for is technologies that connect you. Less so than functional. Even though you need the functional, it's not what you live for somehow. You live for the connection.
Agree. Sometimes the technology functions brings value in the short term, so we needed that, and therefore then it's obviously appreciated. But then if you look at the longer term, technologies exist for different reasons.
And I really like the use of the word like overcome that you know Kathy was using, because especially when we talk about disability, like there is this narrative of overcoming, having to overcome the fact that you know you might not be able to walk, and even the terms in which we describe disability is we always start from what people cannot do. So someone who has a disability is someone who cannot walk. It's someone who cannot see or cannot hear. Have you ever met someone who is blind and uses a screen reader on their phone, the speed at which they have the screen reader on their phone is, I cannot understand like anything of what says because it talks too fast. So one of the things that, you know, a lot of blind folks can do is, and there have been very large-scale studies that prove this, they have much higher listening rates than someone who is sighted. And it's not a superpower that they acquire, it's a skill that they practice. There is actually a very interesting anecdote that apparently during, I believe, the Cold War, one unit of the CIA started to recruit blind folks to intercept code messages over the phone because they would be much more efficient. And, you know, that's, again, what if we start thinking about what people can do as a result of their lived experiences rather than what they might not be able to do as a result of a physical condition or, you know, like a medical condition or anything like that.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. I mean, for the future of society, that challenges us is what angle are you seeing? One of the things that often comes into mind is that we always look for things that we don't have and then trying to improve ourselves or learn or gain or overcome, as you were saying. But truth of the matter is we also have a lot of skill sets. We also have a lot of other abilities. Are we valuing them? It's something else. And as Giulia was saying, if, you know, out of the 5 senses, 1 sense is down, that actually enhances other senses trying to overcompensate or maybe like, you know, grow what you call superpower to, you know, gain into it. Thoughts on this, Chihiro?
Yeah, this is not just those that have disability or something that you think you're lacking. This can be for anyone. In service design, we call this resources, the skills, the abilities, whatever you have with you that you are able to do, we call these resources. And each and every one of you here, I mean, like every human being has their own sets of resources that you have, which you might have nurtured, which you might have had as when you were newly born, which you might have cultivated on your own self, or maybe you can cultivate like in the future. And sometimes you might be like losing your resources, like the ability to hear, the ability to see. I mean, like I've been having terrible eyesight ever since COVID when I've been like on the screen for 24/7. I've been losing that. And you know how to
I echo you on that.
You know, I mean, everyone is very, I mean, on an equal base here in terms of the abilities you've got. And how can we cope and like cultivate and deal with resources is what I would say.
So I have this really crazy question, and Catherine, bear with me. I will go around and ask each of you this. So what's your view? Because right now there are some AI and robotic and technology that are now, should I say, programmed in a way to become companion of human. You know how, Catherine, you were talking about connections. What's your take on that? For the future of society, are we heading towards that direction?
I mean, in a way, so technology can help with supporting connections between people. I do think that there is a space in which sort of, robot companions might help create sort of different types of connections. I mean, we grow attached to objects on a regular basis. We all have favorite item of clothing, like small knickknacks, and that we might have around the house. And that is because of the experience we connect those objects to. So in a way, if sort of assistive, like robots, companions can provide experiences that are meaningful, maybe we will grow attached there. If you're asking me, would he ever be able to substitute the connections we have to other humans? I don't think it will ever get that far, no.
Catherine, your thoughts?
Personally, I think one of the most interesting questions about AI companion robots is actually the question about what makes us human and what makes life worth living. And you could spend a whole panel discussing that. Just before the panel started, I introduced you to my dog, the Yogi Bear. And of course, I love Yogi Bear very much. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the most important sentient being in the world. But he's just my dog, right? But I think that I'm sure that we can get just as attached to a robot. I'm absolutely sure. So that's, I believe we can. So I don't agree with Giulia in this for once. I think they could replace us. And the reason I think they could replace human interactions is because I think we have to be very careful about, once we introduce a technology, how it changes us. And I could see a world where we begin to introduce these intelligent robots, and actually over time what we end up with is us, we will regress in some ways. So we're talking here about disability, and people who maybe don't have a sense, another sense will increase. Great. The classic example we give when we're teaching is, how many people in your audience know a mobile phone number off the top of their head? How many mobile phone numbers do you know? How many people know more than 10 phone numbers? I'm going to guess there's no hands have gone up, right? When I was 10 years old, I probably knew 10 phone numbers, right? But now I don't know 10 phone numbers. Now I know 3 phone numbers, right? And so I think, that's a very classic thing. It's the same with like Google Maps, like how many people now can navigate their own way through countries, how many people are really good at orientating. So you fast forward that a few hundred years, what are we doing to ourselves? And so I always think when you're designing a new technology, you also need to think about what could the long-term impacts of this new type of interaction be, and you won't be able to foresee all of them. None of us could foresee all of them. So I think that's important. I was going to say something else, but I think Giulia might want to come in. Go on. Did you?
Julia? Did you wanted to say something else?
No,
okay.
No.
No, sorry. I'll just end then by just saying that I think that we do need to be careful about these human interactions with robots. I'm not against them, but I think it's really sad that we have so many billion people in the world, and we feel the need to make companion robots. Like, if you just think of that as a concept, we've got billions of lonely people, and our solution is to make a robot. It feels like the wrong answer to the question, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'll hand it back over, maybe Chihiro.
Personally, I think I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Chihiro, thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, being in a media design school, I'm sure we all value technology, from like all sorts of technology. But what is the technology for is what I think we should continue to think about. Yeah. It's not like we're like randomly using, like combining like cutting edge technology with cutting edge technology, and what's it for? No, we're using technology to do some sort of purpose, and I'm sure it should benefit someone or something or some specific field or some context, which in service design we call this value. So technology should be utilized in an appropriate manner that speaks to whatever issue that whomever has.
Yeah. And I think one thing we always want to keep in mind is the differences in interest that there are. Because you that or I that use a technology, we have a particular interest in mind. But the person who makes it, who sells it to you, they might have a very different interest. It's, the old age of if you're not the customer of, it's because you might be the product. It's the argument around social media that all these technologies that are free, they're free because effectively what they run on is the data that they get from you and they provide to advertisers. So I think when we talk about technologies and what technologies are for, we should always keep in mind that there is a purpose that is the one that people might use it for, but there is also a different level of interest that comes into place, and that's usually where things get a bit more dicey.
I'm seeing Catherine's reaction here. Seems like you have more thoughts right now.
Yeah, I suppose I'm always, like Chihiro says, I also work in the Department of Computer Science and Design, and I want to make creative things, and I don't think there's a what's that word I'm looking for? I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? I think you can design robots or interactions that will do good, right? And that can also help even enhance human collaboration and communication and overcoming our biases in certain things. Like robots can be really provocative in helping us think through some of these really fundamental questions about what it is to be human, what it is to be part of a society, what is it to be part of a global community, what is it to have an identity, to have multiple identities, right? At some level, people with schizophrenia or people with bipolar are sometimes considered people with like multiple personalities, and that's really bad, right? But then in a different world, we go in and we go gaming and we're a completely different human and like we're a different character completely, and that's okay. That's part of just being part of society. So I think that technology can really help us provoke the questions that we need to ask of ourselves, and I do think we can create robots that can help us be more caring. Does that make sense? But I think we have to wonder what the purpose is for, because sometimes if you go back to that resource thing that you were talking about, which I completely understand, like we're super under-resourced for community care, for example. Nobody seems to work in community care. I've been a nurse. I've been a community care worker. I have washed people. I have put them on toilets. I have emptied bedpans. There is nothing wrong with that work, and yet somehow our society says, well, I don't want to do that work, but somehow I'm a different person because I'm a professor of computer science, but I can also care for people. And so I think we don't need robots to replace the jobs, these functional jobs that we don't want to do. We want robots to come and enhance our society, to make us more cohesive and more coherent. And actually, as human beings, we should accept that there's this plethora of life, and some of it is caring, and some of it is production, and some of it is just enjoyment.
So yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Catherine. So as Giulia and you were saying, there is different levels. There is a functional level where technology can comes in. There is the concept of value which links to the purpose, which is all the way up in the end behind. And that's why a lot of times when we're looking at, or even for students at media school, when you're thinking about utilizing technology, really not just about what is it for or who is it for, but also the value that brings. And also what Catherine was saying, that we want technology to be there to enhance the cohesiveness rather than for a particular angle, particular purpose. So yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting for that. Now, on that end, where we were talking about where people were using it as a commercialization product, Commercial and inclusive, it seems two different diverse category. Do we see them blending? Do we see them becoming either more inclusive for businesses? Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll try and keep my thoughts succinct on this one because you could go on for a long time. I think that when I was a young designer, so that's a long time ago. When I was a young designer, we were taught, the bell curve. We were taught to design for the 95th percentile or the 75th percentile. Like you design in that middle, and you try and push the edges out a bit as much as you can. But ultimately, in order for your product to be successful, you need to hit this percentile. And that's absolutely true and brilliant. I worked in medical device design, designing angioplasty catheters. You don't really want my design that's going inside your body and a balloon that's going into your artery to be like a wonderful experimental thing. Like you want it to work for the 99.9% of the population, and that's a very good thing. But I think what we're seeing even with Google now, with Microsoft, with Meta, Google, for example, have launched, it's not yet available in the UK or Japan, but it's been launched in Australia, America, Ghana, randomly, and Canada, an app called Relate. And Relate's come from the Euphonia project, which comes from looking at how do we understand motor neurons, people with motor neuron disease or ALS, so dysarthric or slurred speech, how do you better interpret it, and how do we produce that into text? Now, Google are interested in that because some parts of them, they want to do a good thing, right? It's a good thing to do. But the other reason is it's going to make their algorithm better. If you can fix it for these extreme cases, then you're going to be able to fix it for the mainstream, and it will make their algorithms better. And so I think we're seeing this duality of purpose now, especially in the major corporations, the multinationals that we all consume, and of which we are the product, as Giulia says. I think they're beginning to see that actually, under the various laws globally, they have to do something good. They want to do something good anyway. They don't not want to. So here's a good thing to do. Let's be more inclusive for disabled people. But now legally they have to do it. And on top of that, there's now an increasing incentive for their market because it will make their algorithms better. So we're seeing this shift, I think, to working in these extreme use cases, and then seeing what sort of flows into the mothership, if you like, of the main product catalog. So if that's a good or a bad thing, it's up for debate. Ultimately, in many cases, it will mean for the first time disabled people will get access to mainstream technologies. And I think in many cases, that will be an incredibly good thing because people will be able to choose a technology which won't stigmatize them. They can just have that technology. I've got a phone. But it will bring you back to that digital divide that we talked about before, because you have to have an Android phone of about over $150. And at the moment, it's only in English. So again, it will be like English-speaking countries first, which again eliminates a large part of the population. So that will be a problem. I think the second problem will be that some disabilities or some people will still get left behind. So, and some things always need specialist services. Like you can't fit a prosthetic limb if you don't know what you're doing, a lower limb prosthetic. Like you need some clinical training for that. And I think that sometimes there's this euphonia about how the big tech companies are going to fix everything. They won't fix everything, but tech can help fix a lot of things. So there's this. I think there's an exciting space that we're playing in, and increasingly I think we will be able to use, augmented reality, virtual reality to explore what types of legs you'd want, what types of limbs you want, or even help in the limb fitting process. But you'll still need a clinician in the loop to make that process work well. So how do we integrate that will be an interesting challenge.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thoughts, Giulia?
Well, as a reformed clinician in the room, I do wholly agree on that. Like I do think that for many things we should try to remove sort of barriers to access as much as possible, and equip people with the right kind of expertise, so that they can make the best decisions for themselves, that they can go off and choose to use a particular kind of application or a device that suits their needs. either to choosing between different types of like screen readers or text-to-speech technologies or anything of the sort. There is always going to be some like some people with disabilities or with like different kinds of needs, as Catherine was saying, that will require sort of different kinds of adaptations, and that's where I think modularity becomes really important, so that people can, different solutions can be put together in a way that allows us to build effectively the equivalent of technological Lego blocks.
Flexibility, basically, the ability to combine or reconstruct in ways that is most suitable for each individual needs, however they see fit, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
On that end, Chihiro, do you see this same type of concept happening in Japan a lot, particularly?
Yeah, I think it's about how to cultivate the market on the long run. Market meaning not just like the what do you say, the Sunday morning market, but it's more about like how many people are interested, or how many people are concerned, or how many people have even thoughts in their mind that have to do with that. So I think it has a lot to do with education as well. How many people are around you that you know, and how close can you be, or like have you ever had any interactions? And I think the diverseness has changed, I mean, compared to when I was a kid, of course, but I'm sure there still are lots of things that Japan can learn from other countries.
And I do think that what you were saying in terms of cultivating the market can make a huge difference. Kathy probably remembered that as well, but one of the things that we saw when we were working in Kenya is that once telecom companies started to put disabled people on advertising materials and show them that, this kind of technology, this kind of product is for you as well, and start to, listen to what people are interested in, and show how a particular piece of technology might enable you to do what you want to do. But all of that can only start if we listen to people, what people want to do, and try to figure it out how then particular bits of technology can help people do what they want, not what we think they should do, because that only creates resistance.
Yeah. Helping them to see the possibility of technology, how it can assist them, is only one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is really to listen and observe their needs fundamentally, to see the possibility in that as well. So actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but the concept of inclusiveness in the future of society actually culturally can actually be very diverse. It can be defined very differently, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that the definition of things like inclusion and diversity, it's something that everyone is trying to pin down, but for its nature, I actually don't think it can. It will always mean something different to different people, and we work a lot with definitions that are very complicated. I mean, Chihiro brought it up earlier about aging. What does aging mean? Like when do you start? Is there a threshold after which you enter in that kind of in that particular segment of the population, and disability is the same.
Where would you like to draw that line? Let's start this conversation.
I shall never say anything about that.
Just kidding. This is always a joke for us when we start looking at aging in communities and issues. The very first thing we always ask is, okay, how do you define that, and where is that line? Yeah, sorry, Catherine. That's just one of the things that we talk about a lot here when we're working with the students. What are your thoughts on this?
On the line between what is a disability, or
yes, of course.
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah, well, Giulia and I have had many conversations about this too. So I think it has to be defined by the person feeling that they are, that the interactions that they're able to have in society are not what they wish for, because there's some structural things in their way. I mean, that's a bad definition, but if you think about somebody with an impairment, like you can have two people with an impairment, say for example impaired sight. So I need these glasses, and I'm the classic thing is I'm not disabled once I have my glasses, right? And I would not tick a box on a form to say I'm disabled because I have these glasses. In about 10 years time, I suspect that without my glasses I will be very impaired. I would really find it hard to navigate a screen or navigate. At the moment I can probably just about I'd be okay. But at that point, if I lived in a world where I didn't have glasses, then I would tick a box that says, yes, I'm disabled. And obviously I could be, but I think as well, there's, I don't know, it's a really difficult question. Because I think one of the questions Giulia and I have a lot of the time is around chronic health conditions or around the aging process. So my mother, for example, I visited my parents yesterday, and my mother is really deaf. I mean, she's really deaf. Like everyone has to shout. The television was at like some ridiculous volume. I had a headache when I left the house. But she's not deaf. As far as she's concerned, she'll wear glasses. And she said, Giulia, I took a picture of the wheelchair. It's the worst wheelchair in the world. I was like, where did that wheelchair come from? And she said, I'm using it. I bought it off Amazon. Of course, she bought it off Amazon. It came from China. I'm like, it came from China to my brother's house in Argentina. And then he gave her this wheelchair. Anyway, it's a horrific wheelchair. But I'm like, why are you using the wheelchair? Why wouldn't you get one of those walk? She said, I use it so that I can walk along it with it from behind, and then I can sit in it, and your dad can push me then when I get tired. And I said to her, but why don't you get one of those walkers, that you could actually, oh no, God, I'm not old, I'm not disabled, I could never have one of those. And I'm just, but this is a really badly designed piece of technology which you will use, right? And it's a wheelchair, and you won't use a hearing aid, but you will wear glasses. It like your mind just like goes. I have no idea why or how she makes those decisions, but obviously they're very important. They're her decisions, right? So fine. But yeah, so I think it's really difficult, and then you get into really difficult decisions with what is disability, with things like neurodiversity, people who might be autistic or have ADHD or be dyslexic, or people with mental health conditions. Like if you have depression or you have anxiety, are you disabled? Sometimes. And oftentimes the law and people don't deal well with sometimes. So if you're, for example, somebody with ME or chronic fatigue, and you use a wheelchair sometimes, but then sometimes you get up, people are like, what are you doing? So our brains want to put you in a box or another box. We're not very good at just allowing people to be. And I think if we began to get more into that world of realizing it's just a continuum. And we are all disabled sometimes, and we should design in this inclusive sphere. It would help break down some of these barriers. But then at the same time, disabled people would argue, well, actually, if we didn't all collectivise together and fight for our rights, we would be forgotten. Does that make sense? So you have this this dichotomy between making sure that people have space to collectivise and fight for the rights that they deserve, as well as trying to advocate for a more inclusive society.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Catherine. I love that concept, particularly when you're talking about it is actually a continuum. and the example that you brought up reminds me of my grandma. My grandma actually are very similar in defining, do I need an hearing aid or not? No, I'm not disabled. And there's this really stereotypical thinking about what is disabled and what kind of equipment are for disabled in her mind. And that's why, Giulia, thoughts?
Yeah, no, that resonates a lot. I mean, in many respects, when we look at like classifications of assistive technologies, I see in front of me at least 2 people with glasses. There is more behind. Glasses are an assistive technologies. Nobody that uses glasses ever describes themselves as disabled. And yeah, there is very strange categories. Like I remember when my grandmother got old, starting to use a cane was correct because I'm old. Old people walk with a cane. Fair enough. Also, it was like occasionally used to threaten me whenever I was not behaving appropriately. But that's a very different kind of story. But when it came to using a wheelchair, then yeah, that was like absolutely no. And I was like, but I don't understand why. And we have a lot of notions like that. I mean, probably most flexible assistive technologies that I can think about it right now. Everyone got one in your pockets. You don't have pockets, but your mobile phone. There is tons of things on your mobile phone that are used for assistive technologies. If you leave voice messages online or WhatsApp, if someone has like a disability for which they have reduced hand dexterity, they also use that. We have this obsession with labeling things, whereas a lot of time things will be just much easier if everyone just could use what they needed. And I know that from a legal point of view, labeling is important because there are certain things that are important, for example, to make sure that governments provide for people so that they can work, attend school, be healthy, and everything like that. But in everyday life, this obsession with where the line of sort of disability or age or wellness or illness is really not as defined as we make it to be.
Actually, from a communication perspective, the concept of labeling really is serving it as a shorthand, so that you can very quickly grasp what this person is like or what this concept is like in a very short matter. Particularly nowadays, everything is going at a tremendously fast speed. And so if you see someone, for lack of an example, in a black dress and walking in heels and walking down the hallway, you immediately recognize that as a female, but then that's just a labeling system that works in your mind as a shorthand for a quick recognition of you grasping what that concept is. And so, Giulia, echo to you for sure. It is needed to a certain extent, but where do you draw that line is always a challenge. So, believe it or not, it is actually 7 minutes away from our hours already. I want to do this very daring thing, and I know when I do this in Asia, whenever I ask, is there any questions, and I'm going to face with this challenge of dead air, so but I'm gonna do this anyway. Are there any questions? Do you have any questions? Here. Yeah. You can ask in any language you prefer. Yay!
日本語で大丈夫です。
Yeah, 大丈夫ですよ。どうぞどうぞ。 素晴らしいです。Okay. Well, join us. Join us. じゃあ、sit down, 座ってください。どうぞどうぞ。
はいはいはい。
Okay, here we go. What are your questions?
結構その身体的な
はい。
そのディサビリティについてのお話があったと思うんですけれど、例えばその ADHD とか発達障害とかそういったメンタル的なそのディサビリティについてはすごくこう見つかりにくかったり気づきにくかったりするんですけど、そういう人たちに対してそう気づいてあげたりとか、何かこうなんだろうアプローチできるために何ができるのかっていうのを考えてるんですけど、その件に関して何かこう活動とかなんですかね、ご意見があれば聞いてみたいなと思っています。はい。
Sorry, for Kathy, Chihiro, for Kathy, would you mind explaining it? Chihiro, for Kathy?
For
can you
Kathy,
explain?
the
Yeah.
question was basically there is a lot of disabilities that are not visible, and why label might be useful sometimes to understand what kind of accommodations one person needs. How we can also support someone who has invisible disability. I would say my biggest recommendation is to ask. So most of the time, people might be very comfortable telling you if, for example, if we're having a meeting on Zoom, some people who are neurodivergent might find it very stressful if everyone has their videos on, because it's difficult to understand who's talking. So sometimes if we're organizing an event or something, we ask for what kind of accommodations do you need. You can think about it, actually, the best way I can think about it is if you were inviting friends for dinner at your house, you would ask them, is there something that you don't like? Is there something that you cannot eat that, like I should leave out for this evening? And they will tell you. They might give you a reason as well. They might tell you, I don't eat, I don't know, nuts because I'm allergic. Or they might just tell you, I don't eat nuts, without giving you a reason for it. So if we ask people for what they need, they'll tell us what they need. And if they want to use a label that acknowledges their identity, because that is important to them, they're welcome to do so, but they don't have to. So they might just tell you, it would be useful for me if we were to do this. So that's usually a good rule of thumb.
Okay, Kathy, any thoughts on this question?
I think running out of time, so I agree with Giulia. And thank you for the question. Thank you for being brave enough to ask it. I'm sorry my Japanese is not good enough to understand you, and that I can't reply in Japanese. But I think the other thing is just to give people the benefit of the doubt. If people are abrupt, or you perceive them to be abrupt, or maybe you perceive them to be very scattered, you just need to believe that person is doing their best and give them the benefit of the doubt. And if it's something that causes you a problem, then you just need to say that. I'm finding it challenging because when you did this, I find it like this. I'm just wondering how we can work better together. Then you can both have a constructive conversation around both of your needs. Does that make sense? Rather than it be singling out somebody else's needs. It's just a conversation. But believe that people are doing their best is my best advice.
Thank you so much. Now, I know we're tight on time, but thank you everyone for being here and also online. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for moderating.
Arigato.
Thank you, Kathy.
How do we wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay.